Hey all, here OS Reviews. Today we're taking a closer look at the LincPlus T3. This is a Android 13 based tablet. It's an alternative to brands like Chewy, T-Class, Aldo Cube, and this tablet in particular has very competitive specs in the budget to mid-range segment that it's competing against. It can actually be found for around $165, often going on sale with additional coupons, and it's rocking a MediaTek Helio G99 processor, which is a super popular choice these days. There are other tablets running on this exact same chipset, including the Xiaomi Redmi Pad, not to mention the Realme Pad 2 that was just recently announced having the same processor, plus Doogie's T30 Pro also having that same chip, and even Lenovo's popular Tab P11 Gen 2 also uses this exact same chip. And this is a pretty tried and tested chipset, which is relatively energy efficient, around 6 nanometers, and interestingly, most of these G99 tablets also have Widevine L1 support, including this LincPlus T3. So it supports Netflix and Full HD, which is a certification that many lower cost tablets in the past had omitted. So despite the screen resolution being Full HD, they could only play it back in lower resolution, something like standard res. So this is great to see now even on a budget tablet, and having a 10.3-inch 2K resolution IPS LCD screen, 8 GB of built-in RAM, 128 GB of built-in storage, which is further expandable by a micro SD card slot, along with a 7,000 mAh capacity battery, which should supply around 10 hours of web browsing before you need to recharge it, 20 watt for charging, juicing it up in around 2 hours, and also features a profile of 7 millimeters weighing 460 grams, so pretty lightweight for a 10-inch tablet. And Android tablets in general are making a little bit of a resurgence after being almost dead for a few years, so this is really after Google announced their own Pixel tablet earlier this year and started to really push developers to make tablet versions of applications again, optimizing the software experience to have more split screens and a dock at the bottom, which this tablet takes advantage of because of running on a nearly stock version of Android 13 that we'll see later on. Otherwise, in terms of packaging accessories, you also get a USB Type-C charging cable, and then the wall adapter that is supplied does reach the maximum 20 watts that the tablet is capable of charging at, which is great. Pen for releasing the micro SD card tray, although it doesn't have SIM card slot because there is no cellular capabilities on this particular unit, and just a quick user guide. There is also a factory pre-applied screen protector, which is a pretty neat extra, and the screen here is fully laminated, so there is no gap between the glass and the LCD underneath, so this is quite a high quality panel with plenty of sharpness, again at 2K for the money that you're paying, even though it is 60 Hz and not something like 90 or 120. On the right-hand edge, you find access to the Type-C port for charging, along with 2 of the stereo speakers. On the very top, you find access to the power key, along with a volume rocker, and then finally on the left-hand spine, there's access to the 2 additional speakers for the total of 4 that you get on this unit, similar to some of the Lenovo tablets, giving you pretty good stereo separation. On the very back, there's access to a aluminum construction, so the entire thing here feels surprisingly quite robust and well built in the hands. There's just a small plastic strip on the very top there for the antenna reception. The very bottom, by the way, you also find the aforementioned micro SD card slot for expanding the built-in memory, although this particular model does not have any further contacts for attaching a keyboard dock, for instance, although you can of course connect it using any Bluetooth keyboard that you would prefer. You also find a 13 megapixel autofocus camera with an LED flash. The front camera, by the way, is 8 megapixels. Other connectivity options include built-in GPS plus dual-band Wi-Fi and Bluetooth 5.2, although similar to the keyboard situation, there is no official stylus support on this unit, though that is more or less expected at this really low price point, I'd say. Overall, very well built and actually looks quite clean and modern from a design perspective. Maybe the only hardware addition that I would like to see added in more budget tablets going forward would be some form of a fingerprint scanner for biometric authentication. You get all the standard Google utility tools pre-installed, plus the Play Store, and that is pretty much it. The majority of storage is left clean for you to install the applications and media content that you actually need, and also an easier way to multitask using the dock there at the bottom to drag up and have a split screen experience of accessing 2 apps at a time. So it just makes some of these gestures a little bit easier to use, potentially having up to 3 columns that you can interact with, which looks quite clean, I have to admit, plus the presence of that navigation bar at the bottom for quickly jumping into some of your commonly used applications, which will always be present when you are inside of an application. So it's great to see Google optimizing the tablet experience more and more these days, and actually putting more attention and detail into some of these UI elements. Granted, the app situation is still not quite as ideal as on the Apple side of things, where iPadOS unfortunately just still has more tablet-optimized apps, at least at this moment, especially for some third-party applications that will merely stretch to fill the screen size. But perhaps in the growing days, especially with Google pushing harder, we'll see more tablet-optimized apps in the Play Store as well. Otherwise, navigating around the UI all feels like a generally responsive enough experience that is similar to Qualcomm Snapdragon 600 to 700 chips in terms of raw horsepower, so a great choice in this budget segment. And this is a 16:9 aspect ratio screen, so a little bit taller and better for content consumption, watching videos, as compared to the more boxy shape on an iPad, for instance. But since it's not too large, it still can be handled in the horizontal orientation relatively comfortably into the camera. Since it's not a phone, my expectations are quite modest as long as it's able to scan in documents, and the selfie cam looks good enough for video conferencing. I think it suffices. But at the very least, it does have HDR and that built-in flash, and it's just a very simple UI. Here's a quick sample of for example, text that I was scanning in, and you can see that everything is still, for the most part, not too bad in terms of legibility. Again, for basic purposes like this, you'll be perfectly fine with that autofocus sensor. So takeaway being that the speaker quality is really not shabby for one that's built in such a slim tablet, and having 4 of them just adds a little bit more of extra volume. I wouldn't say it has the most bass in the world, but at the very least it doesn't sound too tinny, and again does pack in a good enough experience. If you're streaming back some Netflix, TV shows, it should be more than sufficient. Although one thing to keep in mind is that this model does not feature a headphone jack. You can use wireless headphones or a Type-C adapter, but it used to be that on some budget tech products, headphone jacks were still present, and it's just a little unfortunate that it's really no longer the case anymore, especially on a larger device like this. But it is what it is. At the very least, again, the screen here is big and vibrant. It's quite a nice quality IPS LCD screen. Things are still quite responsive when it comes to playing and buffering. You don't really have to wait at all. You can even go back, have a picture-in-picture mode, and UI elements are still keeping up without too much slowdowns or hiccups. In terms of loading back pages and content, it is super fast. Responsiveness doesn't pose an issue, giving us a pretty impressive experience, to be honest, on such a low-end device. And even complex pages like this with lots of ads and videos don't pose too many issues for the Helio G99 to load up. The 8GB of RAM in my testing was sufficient for opening up around 8 to 10 tabs in the browser. I could jump back and forth between them if I'm doing some research, maybe doing some shopping, and it was still able to hold those pages in memory pretty well. So I'd say this makes for a pretty good experience when it comes to reading back articles. Overall, I would say this is good enough for some casual gaming. Don't expect to play at the highest frame rates for the most demanding titles like, say, PUBG and Asphalt 9. However, for the majority of titles, you can still get a fairly impressive experience, and even more complex games can still be installed and will run if you just slightly lower the graphic settings. Point being, for a bit of light gaming as well as productivity type apps, you really won't have too many issues as you're engaging with this tablet, and it doesn't really get too hot either. You'll notice some occasional drop frames, but again, nothing that gets in the way of the overall experience. Reading comics on this tablet is also a pretty comfortable experience, again thanks to this fully laminated 2K screen. It's bright and vibrant, content loads up pretty quickly. And same thing goes if you are loading back PDFs as well. Plus, what's also crazy is some of the exclusives that were previously limited to Google Pixel products have now gradually become available to more third-party products. For example, live caption. So that's using the onboard machine learning to give you a text transcription of what you are watching in real time, even on content that doesn't have built-in subtitles, and accuracy is actually quite good. So that is more or less it as far as our hands-on review of, again, the LincPlus T3. It shows that you really don't have to spend a fortune to get a pretty good experience on an Android tablet these days. Other components have also been chosen quite well, including that Helio G99 processor, the sufficient 8 gigs of RAM, and that 2K resolution screen. So all in all, really not bad. I think provides a great alternative to some of the other tablets that we mentioned using a similar chipset, but even at a cheaper cost in many cases. For example, the Redmi Pad is typically found for a little north of $200. So in some cases, you can save up to $70 to $80 with this particular model, since arguably the brand power of LincPlus is still a little bit weaker, so they're trying to provide even more value. You can learn more details in the links down below. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That's been the LincPlus T3.